Calynn, what happened? Fuck. He had to be serious if he used my actual name. When I woke up this morning, he was in my apartment. Ronan exploded with anger, standing from his rocking chair and taking 2 steps towards me. When did you think you were going to tell me about this? I wasn't. Today, I am excited to share that we have indie author Sarah Neeson with us. Sarah is the author of the Glamour Blind Series, which is in the urban fantasy, paranormal, and fantasy romance genre. There are currently 3.5 books out in the series, Truth and Smoke and Destiny in Flames, which are the first 2 books and have a Goodreads average of 4.33. So congratulations on that average, Sarah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There's also a novella called Out of the Embers, which has a Goodreads rating of 4.49. And her third and most recent book, which was just released last week, is Hope in the Inferno. And that was released on May 7th. So, wow, we have so much to talk about today. Welcome, Sarah. We're so glad to have you here.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Let's dive in because I want to make sure all of our listeners are not confused by my ramblings there. So you currently have 3 main books out and then 1 novella out in the Glamour Blind series. I said that all right, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so the 3 books, I shortened the titles to Truth, Destiny, and Hope. They are Calynn's story. She's a fae changeling who learns she's not as human as she thought she was. So she starts a quest for the truth that leads to, in Truth in the Smoke, it leads to breaking and entering, an assassin, and a man with more than a few secrets of his own. As I was writing, I got to know the human woman that she was changed with. Her name is Nihilus. And I realized she needed a story as well, so I wrote her one. It's called Out of the Embers. It's a novella. It's a redemption story because she's not the nicest person when you meet her in Truth and Destiny. Yeah, and so it's just a lot of fun getting to write her story and seeing how she became a better person.
I love a good redemption arc. I love my morally gray characters. I love all the drama, but give me a happy end. Well, no, actually, I'm going to change that because redemption arcs don't necessarily mean happy endings. And I think some people think in order to have that redemption arc, you need a happy ending, which I don't think is always the case, but definitely like a good redemption arc.
It is not always the case, but it is definitely the case with Out of the Embers. She does have a happy ending.
Well, that's good to know. So why don't I know we want to talk about Hope and Inferno, the book that you just had come out. But before we go too far down that, why don't we backtrack a little bit to your first book, Truth in the Smoke, or Truth, as you short called it. So can you kind of give us and give our listeners a little maybe background on what inspired you to start the series?
Yeah, so actually it's an interesting question. So I started this series back in 2016. Interestingly, I had taken a bunch of creative writing classes at college and university. And the last one that I took, I had a professor who ended up making me stop writing for about 6 months. I had like a crisis of faith. And what I came to realize was he was just the wrong reader for what I wanted to write. So then I had to kind of decide, okay, so what is it that I want to write? And at the time, I was reading a lot of urban fantasy, specifically The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And I had been listening to some podcasts that had a lot to do with lore. And in fact, the podcast I was listening to is called Lore. And they were talking about changelings, and my family comes from Ireland. My dad was actually born in Northern Ireland. And I thought this was a really interesting idea and something that I hadn't seen before, specifically a changeling. And so then it just sort of kept evolving. And when I started, I thought it was going to be 1 book. And then I was like, no, it's going to be 2. And then I was like, nope, it's going to be 3.
It's
So
interesting. I love talking with authors, and they share that, they have this idea, and then somewhere along the line, the characters just sort of take over and you almost become a
absolutely.
scribe. And it kind of almost sounds like as this book kept growing and growing, that kind of happened to you.
It certainly did. In fact, I can say something recent with the Hope in the Inferno. I was rewriting. So I had a first draft and I knew I had to rewrite it. And I rewrote the first chapter and a character shows up. And I was like, who are you? Where did you come from? What are you doing here? It turns out she's going to get her own book later. So she came in for a reason. But when I wrote it, I had no idea what she was doing in the story. But I kept going. I'm like, well, she's obviously here for a reason. And yeah, you don't always get a choice when you're writing. Sometimes it just happens the way that it happens.
I, as a reader, I love that. I will say I love it when I connect with a series, when I connect with an author. I want to know. I want that character development. I want that world building. I want to know what they're going through in those arcs. And I want to know their secondary characters and everything about them. So I think that's really exciting that you're giving your readers really immersion into this world you've created.
I actually, in addition to, so the Glamour Blind series is all first person, single point of view from Calynn's point of view. But when I originally started, her love interest, Ronan, he's a very reticent character. He's standoffish. He's very holds himself back. He's portrays himself as emotionless, which he is not. So it was tricky for me to get to know him. And so I ended up writing a whole bunch of scenes from his point of view. And then I had them. So I have them. They are published. You can read them. Once you're finished reading Truth in the Smoke, you can sign up to my newsletter and get all of his scenes as well. I like that as well. I like to see things from different points of view. And when you fall in love with a character, you're like, what is he thinking in this moment? So yeah, it's been like, I need that for myself, and I know that other people like it, so I put it out there.
I love it. I love a dual point of view. Like you said, I want to know what's going on in both of their minds. And I know I've discovered some fantastic fan fiction authors who have given me kind of that point of view from books that I've read that haven't given that to me. So I think it's exciting that, and I like how you clarified, get through Hope Inferno, finish the books, and then read the point of view so you don't have spoilers.
Yes, there's definitely major spoilers. I did mention that she comes across a man with secrets of his own. That is Ronan. He's got some secrets, and you don't want to know what they are until the end of the book. So, and but like I said, I needed to know for my own writing purposes what those secrets were. So I wrote them out. I wrote the scene, and I was like, this is how it started.
I love it. I love it. Now,
Yeah.
I did have a question for you, Sarah, just for our listeners that maybe are not familiar with the term urban fantasy. Could you give us a little description of what that means and what they can expect from your books?
Urban fantasy. So there's kind of two genres that kind of take place the same way, and there's a slight difference. So urban fantasy is usually when there's magic in this world, in the world that we're all living in. And it's usually a hidden magic. So like you and I were talking right now, we believe that there's no magic, but there's some other person down the road who's like, actually, I know there is. That's usually urban fantasy. It also usually takes place in a city, like in an urban setting. There's some that take place in like small towns and stuff, but that's generally a slightly different genre. And then there's also connected genre, which is magical realism, where there's magic in this world, but it's not hidden. Everybody knows about it. It's almost like an alternate reality kind of idea.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then so you're blending that with obviously our romance, giving us that, fantasy romance that so much of us love. But then you've added a paranormal twist to that.
Yeah, so the paranormal twist, it's because I wanted to have in future books, I want to basically build this huge world that people can kind of immerse themselves in. And so eventually I will come back to this world where there's witches and wizards and other magic users. So that's kind of where the paranormal comes in. These characters are all fae characters. And that's kind of where I wanted to focus with this series.
But it sounds like to me, in this series of books that you're giving us right now are potentially going to expand, have other characters, have other situations, and the world that you're building is going to be their common ground.
Yes, exactly. Also, I am a Canadian, and the city that I chose is Vancouver. So, because that's where I grew up. And so that's kind of the basis for this story and all future ones is they're all going to take place in this same world, which is a fictionalized version of Vancouver where magic exists, but it's kind of hidden from the rest of us.
I was looking through, I would share, I like to go through Goodreads and kind of get a feel for what some of your readers have thought. And definitely a very common theme I've found is they love the character development. You do a really great job on world building, definitely some slow burn romance, which, ooh, you gotta love a good slow burn, morally gray character. And so it feels like you really have created these characters that people are really loving. And so do you have any inspiration for these characters, or where did they come from?
They come from everywhere. I do have to say that every single one of my characters has a piece of me in them. And it's usually just one little bit. I have to say, Calynn is way more of a badass than I am. I wish I could be as badass as she is. But yeah, so there's definitely pieces that come from a lot of different characters that I've read and seen on TV and in movies, people that I know. And I think at a certain point, the character stops being sort of an amalgamation of things that are in my world and start becoming their own person. And that's when I can start asking them questions and they start answering me, which is honestly the most fun part about writing is when the characters are telling you something and it is almost like it's from them and not from you. And you kind of get surprised by your own characters.
And I think that's a good segue into my next question for you is what is your writing process? Now that you're 3.5 books in and you're thinking about more, what is that writing process and has it evolved over the Glamour Blind series?
I love that question. So you may have heard the term pantser. I don't like that term. I prefer the term discovery writer. I've also likened it to something called fog of war, which is a video game term where your character is in a map and as you move through the game, the map becomes clear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I write is I have an idea of where the story is going to go. And as I get closer to the part that I don't know what's going to happen next, it becomes more clear. How it's evolved is I have started trusting my process. It's terrifying when you start a book and you don't know what's going to happen, especially when you have deadlines. But it's also exciting and just knowing that it's worked before, it's going to work again. And just trusting that you will know what's going to happen when it needs to happen.
And I'm curious, I've like I said, I've had the privilege of talking to lots of different authors, and some authors create spreadsheets of their characters and what type of ice cream they like and what do they like to do on Friday nights and their favorite book. And then some authors have shared, nope, they keep it all in their head. And sometimes it just finds a way to work out. So with your characters, and then you kind of gave us that little teaser that, some other characters have kind of popped up that you weren't expecting. Do you have any processes for keeping all of that organized?
The short answer is no. So I have notes in so many different places. Sometimes I know a thing and I'm like, I wrote it down somewhere, but where did I write it down? I think a lot of it is internal. I do have a spreadsheet because I'm a discovery writer and I don't have an outline beforehand. I create an outline afterwards. And so the spreadsheet is my reverse outline, which is an outline you create after you're already done, where I can kind of see the big picture for the characters. So the website that I use is called One Stop for Writers. It is a subscription-based program, but I found it very helpful to create character sheets through there based on some books written by Angela Ackerman. They're the thesauruses, and one of them is the emotional wound thesaurus. So from that, you can kind of figure out what the wound of the person is, and then from that wound, extrapolate what kinds of lies they believe about themselves, what kind of characters traits they would have, both positive and negative, based on those wounds. It's very helpful to have all of that information. Once I've done it once, I don't tend to go back. It becomes like it's there, but it's in my head. Kind of a combination of starting in a way and then just having the information just be there for me.
Right. I think that's fabulous. And we'll definitely make sure our listeners can get connected with that site that you were talking about if they're interested, because I love that, because sometimes I've read books where they've either arced the character too quick and I'm like, whoa, wait, how did we get there? Well, how did that happen? Or they'll just have them do something that is so out of character and they're not giving us a reason for it. And it just feels fake. I like to get lost in my books and live in that world as if it is an alternate universe. And sometimes I feel like when that happens, it draws you out of the fantasy, it draws you out of the book, and now you're like, what? No.
Yeah. And actually, it was something that I was just discussing with a writer friend of mine yesterday. And I was talking about, as we've mentioned, these books do have a romantic element to them. The reason why two people fall in love with each other. And that's something that I do think about. I love creating characters. What is the core of this person and what is making them connect with this other person? Another thing that I've talked about is I'm a huge fan of tattoos. These particular characters don't have any because they're fae, but some other characters that I've written do. And the idea of thinking about, why did this person get a tattoo? Why this tattoo? Why in this part of their body? And then, like, why are they making the choices that they're making? These are all things that I find fascinating, and it's something that I try to bring into my books.
We've mentioned that this does have that fantasy romance component to it. Where would you say it falls on the spice level?
That's another interesting question. So the first book has closed door scenes because I was not yet comfortable with writing open door scenes. I am sad now that I closed the door. The second book has no spicy scenes because it just didn't make sense for the story. But then Out of the Embers and Hope in the Inferno both have them, open door scenes. So I would personally rate it maybe 3 out of 5 on the spicy scale.
Okay. And
maybe,
it sounds
maybe 4 out of 5.
It sounds like to me that maybe you're giving a little bit of options in the beginning, but definitely as the story evolves, we're getting that spice, which personally I love a nice spicy scene. So I'm really excited to hear that.
Yes, I also like it. I think when I had originally written the books, I was telling myself it was a lie. The truth was that I was not comfortable with writing them yet. I was telling myself that I wanted to make sure in the first scene, she sleeps with him, but she's not in love with him. And then, so the door is closed. And then later, she is in love with him. And so the door is open. I mean, the truth was that I wasn't comfortable yet. And now I am. That being said, I do think if I'm going to have a spicy scene in my book, I want it to have a reason. So I try to think about that. Like, I'm not going to just put it in for its own sake, and it has to make sense. So like with Out of the Embers, there is only one scene, and I was thinking about having a second one, but it didn't make sense. In Destiny in the Flames, there was no spot where it would make sense to have one. So I try to be true to the story as well, which I think is important.
Sarah, I always like to ask my authors, what advice? We have a listener who would love to write a book. It's starting to bubble in their brain. What pieces of advice could you give to that new author?
The first piece of advice I would give to any person who's just starting out is don't worry about other people. Write the book that you want to read. For a couple of reasons. First of all, because you have to read it at least 10 times. I could not tell you how many times I have read my own books going through the editing stages. But the other thing is, if you start out trying to write for someone else, you're going to get bored with it. You're going to put so much pressure on yourself. Just don't worry about the outside at first. The first draft is just for you. The other piece of advice I would always give to authors is if you can find a community, find one. Like I said, I started writing these books in 2016. I actually didn't start seriously considering finishing the series and publishing it until 2020 when I joined a writing community online. In the last 4 years since I've joined that community, and then others besides, I have grown so much as an author and understanding the business of writing that it's been absolutely invaluable.
Fantastic advice. So why don't you share with our listeners, where can they find your books?
So I am a wide author, so that means you can find my books pretty much anywhere you want to download them. They're on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books. You can find the ebook on all of them. If you're having trouble finding them, the links are all on my website, which is 18streetpress.com. Right now, Truth in the Smoke is free because the ebook is free because of Hope's release. And also because of Hope's release, Destiny in the Flames is on sale this week only for 99 cents. It will still be on sale for the rest of the month, but the price will go up as we get closer to June when everything will be back to full price.
For our listeners, if they've not read your books yet, this is a fantastic opportunity to do so with Truth in the Smoke. Now, what platform can they get that for free?
All of them. It will be free on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, and Apple Books.
Fantastic. And then from there, they can get a discounted price on Destiny in Flames, which will then get them into the novella of Out of Embers. And then they'll be all ready for the third book and a little bit of spice book of the Hope Inferno. So sounds like that would be a good weekend to really get to know you and your characters.
Yeah. I heard from another author at a conference that I was at last October. She said something that's really stuck with me, and it's that you learn more from finishing one book than you do from starting 10. And now that I'm here at the end of Hope in the Inferno, it's published, and I'm on to a new project. It's definitely something that I can see that I have done. I've learned so much from finishing these books. Yeah, it's been a really amazing ride.
Oh, and I tell you, Sarah, they are on my order. I am adding that, and I cannot wait to dive into your world and check out personally these books. So, last thing I got to ask is, how can people connect with you? What are your social media sites that people can go and find you?
So I am on Facebook and Instagram. My handle on both is @Sarah Neeson Writes. My pen name is SP Neeson. So if you can't find Sarah Neeson on Amazon and stuff, that's why. I do have my website, which is 18streetpress.com. That's 18, the digits. And on there, you can find links to Facebook and Instagram and also my newsletter. I don't send out newsletters very often. Once a month is enough for me. I figure it's enough for everybody. So if you are interested in signing up for my newsletter, just know that I'm not going to be flooding your inboxes. Yeah. And then on Facebook and Instagram, I have some pretty fun things that I post. I have a couple of Angora goats, so they get shared a bunch on my Instagram. So, yeah.
That's great. And for those of you that are on Spotify, if you want to either click over to our YouTube channel or look at our other social media sites, you will find all of Sarah's social media and book links in there. So, Sarah, I am so excited for you. Congratulations on the release of your third book in this series. Thrilled that you have been with us today. And you got to make us a promise as you're working on new projects. You got to get us back as part of your release party and let us know when you're ready to go live with those.
Absolutely. I actually can say that I'm going to be releasing a new pen name at the end of this year. In addition to writing fantasy, I also am going to be writing contemporary romance.
Oh,
so I will definitely let you know when that happens.
Yes, please do. I love it all. So, Sarah, thank you again so much for being with us today. And thank you all for being with us. Next week, we will be talking to Angel Esquads, and she is an author and an illustrator. And so we're going to be learning about all of her upcoming projects. But until then, read more books and go explore. Bye, everyone.
Bye.